Hey everybody, Gromos here with a new video, and this time I have something new to this channel at least. The game itself is a bit older. In this video I want to take a look at a tank simulator with the colorful name Steel Armor Place of War, and I'm assuming most of you have probably never heard of it. Well, I haven't until a few days ago, when I was looking for videos of some old tank games I used to play on YouTube for nostalgic reasons, like Steel Beast, Panzer Elite or the old Armored Fist action sims. I also came across a video of Steel Armor, a tank sim simulating T-62 as well as M60A1 tanks, and what I saw looked quite nice, especially considering the game is not very well known, even for a simulator. So I was intrigued enough to get the game and take a look myself. After all, good tank simulators aren't exactly the most common games around, and since I just read the books Team Yankee and Chieftains, I was kinda in a tank sim mood. So having played this sim a bit in the last few days, I have to say I was quite positively surprised, and I had a great time playing Steel Armor. As I've said, you don't find that many good tank games around, so I was somewhat surprised to find one this well made which I haven't heard of before. So I figure I also make a video about it and introduce the game a bit and see what people think about it. And maybe this is a game that I will do more videos of in the future every now and then, if there's interest in it. Also, I thought that it was kinda sad that a nice sim like this with so much detail gets so little recognition, while Call of Duty makes millions selling the same game every year since 2003. So I figure I tell you a bit about this game and also show off one of the tanks it simulates, the T-62, and a little battle in it. And if I do more videos about it, I will make one of the M60A2 as well, of course. So let's talk about the game a bit. Steel Armor was originally released in late 2011, so it's not exactly a new game, but I think it aged well. Also, turns out it was re-released on Steam this spring, so it's easy to get compared to some other less well-known simulators. And was made by the independent developer Graviteam. Now, that name I have at least heard about before. Graviteam made a number of tactic games and also tank sims, and I do remember their older T-72 simulator, though I have not played it myself. Anyway, Steel Armor, as I have mentioned, simulates two playable tanks, the T-62 and the M60A1, and it simulates those tanks quite well, I would say. And I also have to say I do like the tank choice. I know many prefer World War II tanks or modern tanks like the Abrams. I'm however also very interested in the earlier Cold War equipment, both in the air and on the ground. So I think it's nice to have a simulation that focuses on tanks from that era, since that is not the most common one. You usually have either World War II or modern equipment in simulators. Though some of the TCS modules start to change that recently. The game incorporates a few historic campaigns to play in which those two tanks, the T-62 and the M60, or at least one of those tanks, took part in, for example the Iran-Iraq War or Angola in the 80s. As well as of course quick missions, and as often in simulators like this, a mission editor for your own scenarios, which I found so far quite easy to use. The game is from 2011 as I have mentioned, so the graphics are not state of the art anymore, but I think they still look quite nice for a game of this age and genre, and considering that the development budget was most likely not very high to begin with. Also, while the tanks don't look quite as pretty from the outside like the counterparts in modern games like War Thunder or World of Tanks, at least here you get to see the inside as well. Now, Graviteam put their experience with tactic games to use, especially in the campaign mode of the game. The campaigns simulate real conflicts or wars and are played in three phases. The first two remind me a bit of wargame airland battle campaigns, which I also recently played. You start on a strategic map of the war zone and you can move around the units under your command, like tank platoons, in turn-based manner. So will the enemy as well as allied units. If you come into contact with the enemy, attack one of their units or get attacked, the units you can use are those that are within the range of this engagement. After that you go into the deployment phase. Here you can deploy your units within the territory you control on the map as you see fit and give those units some initial orders. Order them for example to advance to a certain point in a certain formation or dig in and lay an ambush. That reminds me a little bit of a large-scale version of old Rainbow Six games, but with tanks, where you do some initial planning first and then you hop in the game and play. The units you can deploy may be player-controlled T-62 or M60 tanks, or purely AI units like infantry or scout cars, or other tanks that aren't player-controlled like T-55s. You can of course just control your tank and let the AI do their thing with the other units and your initial orders, but you can of course also still control all the units under your command, either via the map or simply ordering them to stay in formation with your tank to move a unit around. You will generally be directly commanding a tank platoon of 4 tanks, but that depends on the situation and the deployment. You can also call in airstrikes or use artillery if they are available. I will take a more in-depth look at all those functions in the tactic mode in future videos if there's interest in it. In this video I will focus more on introducing the game in general, and when I do more in-depth videos about the game I want some more experience playing it too first. So I focus on the tank action in this one. Now, what I want to do is take a look at one of the tanks in the game, the T-62, and take a quick look at the different crew stations, both to introduce the tank and show some of the functionality of the game when driving a tank. The M60A1 will get its own video later. But for now, let's take a look at the T-62. Some quick history about the tank. Now, just like the NATO in the 50s realized that their current guns were insufficient to reliably penetrate the front of Eastern Bloc T-55s, and therefore adopted the 105mm L7, the USSR determined that the 100mm gun of the T-55 was not sufficient to reliably penetrate the front of new NATO tanks, like the M48, at least with most of the ammunition available at the time. So the decision was made to adopt a new 115mm smoothbore gun, the first smoothbore gun on a tank. Now, while the British 105mm L7 was designed right from the start to fit in the same turrets as the 20-pounders in use before and could therefore be easily fitted into existing Centurion tanks, the 115mm gun would not fit into the existing T-55 turrets. A bigger turret was needed, which in turn needed a larger hull. So while the T-62 is still based on the T-55/55 designs, it is mostly a new tank designed to fit the new gun. And while the T-62 was still produced in very large numbers, those numbers never reached the T-55's production numbers, and the T-62 was less successful on the export market than its predecessor. A possible explanation for that would be that by the time the T-62 was available, new ammo was also available for the T-55's 100mm gun, increasing its capability in armor penetration to the point that many potential customers stuck with the cheaper T-55 instead of taking the newer and more expensive T-62. So let's take a quick look at the different crew stations of the T-62 tank. Let's start with the driver. So this is the driver's seat. You can of course order the driver to go where you want from the commander's or gunner's position, but if you want to drive the tank yourself or want a bit more fine control over exactly where to go, you do it from here. As you can see, you have the typical 2 control levers in front of you, and in this game you can actually use them properly as well. You can select the right or left lever by pressing the left or right mouse button and then just move your mouse back pulling the selected lever. This way you can control exactly how much brake you want to apply to the selected track. That gives you a bit more fine control over the tank compared to the typical A and D on the keyboard, as A and D is just either on or off. It also just adds some tank driving feeling when you actually pull the steering levers. As an alternative you can however also just use A and D if you prefer. Other than that, you use the W and S to move forward and backwards, or you can use the mouse wheel to control the lever to the left to set a fixed amount of throttle, kind of like cruise control. Oh, and those old gearboxes aren't the fastest, so when you want to go from forward to reverse gear, that is not instantaneous. Something to keep in mind, you can't just wiggle back and forth like you do in arcade tank games. On the dashboard to your right you can turn the engine on and off, as well as activate the smoke generator. There are hotkeys for that as well, of course. Other than that you have a speedo, and the red light to the left shows you when the gun is above your hatch and you can't open it. So that's the driver's station. Let's move back into the crew compartment. On the right side of the tank we have the loader, probably the position you will use the least yourself. One interesting thing you can see here is behind the gun breech you have a small catapult. When the gun fires, the gun automatically moves into loading position and the spent case is ejected out the rear of the turret through a small automatic hatch. Cool to look at. And make sure you don't have spent shell casings all over the place in an already cramped tank. Now, other than watching this or look at the commander and gunner do their job, the main reason to be in this position as a player is probably the 12.7mm Dushka machine gun. Our T-62 is a 1972 model, which added a AA 50 caliber machine gun to the tank. However, unlike its counterpart on the M60, it is not mounted on the commander's hatch, but the loader's hatch. So you can directly control this gun from the loader's position. A quick side note here, a 12.7mm machine gun is a 50 cal, not 51, as there is an old myth that a Russian 12.7mm is a 51 caliber gun. That's a misunderstanding, 12.7mm is 0.5 inch. But I digress. Back to the loader position. If you hover over your mouse over a shell, it will give you some info of what it is, and when not turned out you have a vision block to look out to the front. Not much else here. So, moving on to the commander's position. Also pretty much what you would expect here. You can command the driver to go where you want, of course, and that actually works better here than in some other games that I have played. You can order the driver to turn left or right with A and D, and by keeping them pressed you select how much degrees the tank will turn. Turned out you have a better view, but you are exposed, of course. Here you can use a binocular with a range-finding scale in it. When turned in, you can look around via the vision blocks or the commander's periscope, which of course also has a range-finding scale. The one on the bottom is simply for height of the target. It's for a height of 2.7 meters, which is about average for a tank. Russian ones are generally a bit lower than that, Western ones a bit higher. And on top you get a mil scale, with 4 mils between the bars. Other than those range-finding aids, the T-62 does not have a real rangefinder. From the commander's position you can also order the gunner to either fire only on targets you designate and on your command, or order him to look for targets and engage targets on his own, while you're busy doing important commander stuff like looking at maps or taking pictures. Well, and that leads us to the last position in the tank, the one that is most likely the most exciting one for most, the gunner's or gun layer's position. So again, pretty straightforward. You have two sides, the main side as well as one for night fighting, which we take a look at a bit later, and also a vision block above the side to look outside. Let's take a look at the main side. Just like the commander, you have a range-finding scale, the same for height as well as a mil scale with 8 mils between triangles, so 2 mils from a triangle to a small bar. However, range-finding would be primarily the commander's job, so when you aim at the target you can request the range from the commander by pressing the middle mouse button. That might take a while though, and when you have some experience you are probably faster doing it yourself. Also, since the T-62 does not have a real rangefinder, the estimate from the commander might not be 100% accurate. You then have to set the range to the target in the sight, depending on the shell type you are shooting. You have 3 primary shell types available: Sabo, Heat and High Explosive, as well as a 7.62mm coaxial machine gun. The elevation scale all the way on the left, the smallest one, is for Sabo, or armor-piercing discarding Sabo if you want the fancy name. The scale is so small because the subcaliber darts fly very fast, so they are also the easiest to get hits with. Followed by the one for Heat and then High Explosive and the coax machine gun all the way to the right. Though in general with the machine gun you just walk the traces on target anyway. You can decide shell types in the menu to the right and also decide if you want the loader to automatically reload after you fired, or only when you give the order to do so, when you are for example not sure which shell type you need next. Now, as I've mentioned previously, the gun after firing automatically goes into reload position and the shell is ejected out the rear of the turret. That also means though that you will lose sight of your target as soon as you have fired, which is a disadvantage of course. On the plus side, the T-62 is equipped with a gun stabilizer, so you can fire on the move, though being an older system there are limits to what it can do. So, that's a quick overview of the 4 crew positions in the T-62. Again, I will make a more in-depth look at some of them if I do further videos of this title. Now, one more thing about the T-62. The tank has some rudimentary night fighting capabilities, so let's take a look at what they are. The T-62, like many combat vehicles of that era, uses an active infrared system for night fighting. Now, there are 3 main groups of night vision equipment you can generally find on combat vehicles. The first being the image intensifier, which simply amplifies what little light is available from stars or the moon. The range of those is generally low, especially for older models. Then there is the passive infrared or thermal imaging, which you will find on more modern vehicles. A thermal imaging camera can detect infrared radiation and turn them into an image. So you can see heat that is emitted from objects, for example body heat or the hot engine of a tank. It is not emitting anything itself, only detecting infrared, so it is a passive sensor. But that was not developed enough to be useful until long after the T-62 entered service. Now, the last group is active infrared or active illumination, and that is what you have on the T-62. The tank is equipped with a large near-infrared searchlight coaxial to the gun barrel, which can be used to illuminate the target area, and the tank commander scope with its IR filter as well as the gunner's night vision scope can pick that up. And since it is infrared, which the human eye can't see, you won't notice it unless you have the right equipment yourself. It's basically just like pointing a large searchlight at your target, but you can't see the beam from the searchlight with the naked eye, only with the right equipment. Now, this system was already used late in World War II, but had an extremely limited range at the time. With the T-62 the range of the night vision is a bit higher, but still limited to about 800 meters, so you won't do any long-range shooting at night. Which is also why the night scope is so simple compared to the main scope, since with a maximum range of only 800 meters and the muzzle velocity of a tank gun, you don't need anything too sophisticated to hit a tank-sized target. Well, and that's a bit of an overview of the T-62 in steel armor and its basic capabilities. Let's take a look at the short mission in it. Now, that mission is the first that I played after doing the tutorial, so don't expect any tactical genius from it. It's more an example of how not to do it. But there is lots of shooting and explosions, so I figure it's nice to show off the game. Well then, here we are in the deployment screen. We are the red guys, by the way, and as you can see we expect an attack coming in from the north. And I have 3 T-62 platoons of the 10th Armored Brigade, with 4 tanks each. Now, since this is my first try, I fumbled a bit on the strategy screen, and as a result I'm facing quite a lot of enemy tanks while not having all that many myself. But I'm also not aware of that fact yet. And I figured I'd deploy 2 platoons in front of the enemy push and 1 to the east of it, advancing with this platoon as the enemy attack comes in and roll it up from the flank. As I have said, this is the first mission, so I did not put a whole lot of thought into that. Well, let's start from the point where I advance with my 3rd platoon from the east towards the enemy expected advance. As you can see, the weather is quite bad and it is raining, so the visibility is not optimal. And I'm advancing towards the west with my platoon, towards the expected direction of the enemy attack. With the 2nd platoon's 3 tanks deployed to my south and the 1st platoon southwest of me directly in the way of the expected enemy advance. The 3 tanks in my platoon, including my own, should deploy in a line formation when we stop. That is not the best formation choice in this situation, as it turns out. While I was advancing, 1st platoon reports sightings of enemy tanks, and I give the order to halt and look around, expecting the enemy tanks to advance towards 1st platoon in front of me. As a matter of fact, I at first assumed they are already past me and I scan more to the southwest. I'm using the gunner sights to look around, and in this case to take advantage of the high zoom, and if I move the gun stabilization, since the commander's periscope is not stabilized and quite shaky on the move. Now, I can see tank shells fly past in front of me, and one of my platoon's tanks starts to engage a target more to the east, not as far forward as I thought. And as I scan that direction, I can see an enemy tank achieve that. They are further to the rear than I thought, but otherwise it seems my plan worked out so far. They are indeed advancing towards 1st platoon's position, past me, and giving my 3 tanks from my 3rd platoon their flank. I asked the commander for a range estimate and ordered the loader to load sabot rounds. The commander gave me a range estimate of about 500 meters, which I dialed into my sight. Now, the observant among you have probably noticed that I actually used the wrong elevation scale, the one for heat rounds. As I have said, this is my first real battle in the game, and I simply thought at this point that the heat elevation scale is the one for sabot and the very small sabot elevation scale is something else entirely. So I don't have the correct range dialed in. Thankfully, sabot rounds fly very fast and the range is within 500 meters, almost point blank, so I hit anyway, though higher than planned. And since I can shoot into their flanks, I have a good chance of knocking them out, as I don't have to deal with the chieftain's heavy frontal armor. Them not shooting back my way with their 120mm guns, as they are focused on first platoon in front of them, is also nice. For now, it seems, we have a turkey shoot going on, and the enemy is losing quite badly. We are knocking out one chieftain after another, and I am soon out of saber rounds, of which my tank only carries a limited amount, so I have to switch to heat rounds. Their penetration is also good, better as for the saber if you have the best heat rounds available, but they fly slower, so your range estimate needs to be better in order to get a proper hit. In between shots I try to look out the front vision block while my gun points in the sky during reloads, so to keep an eye on the situation. But through the small vision block without any magnification you can't see that much, especially in that weather. It seems some of the enemy tanks start to fall back. One of the chieftains is retreating and I aim for another one that seems to move up behind it. But I forgot to give the loader the command to load the heat round, so I have to let him load the gun before I can fire again. Switching rounds apparently cancels the auto reload order. When I notice that, I give the order to automatically reload again, but I lose sight on my target as the gun goes up into loading position to reload the shell. And as my gun comes back down, I can't quite see the exposed tank anymore I was aiming for earlier. However, I can soon see two turrets hull down. I'm not quite sure if they are already knocked out or not, but for now I can't see any better target. My first round is a bit low and hits short in front of the enemy tank, so I adjust the range in my sight a bit, and this time I use the correct elevation scale too, and with the next shot I get a hit and the tank blows up. Now as my gun reloads I take a look through the vision block again. I can't see much, but you can see a friendly tank to my left is engaging a target more to the north. Now as I was playing the mission, I either missed that or did not realize the significance as I was busy shooting tanks in front of me. What is happening is that another enemy tank platoon is advancing further to the east of the original tank, and this one is now showing up in the flank of my platoon, which is deployed in a line formation. So tanks have trouble seeing or engaging enemies attacking directly from the side, as the tank next to them is blocking their view. It would have of course been better to deploy in the right echelon in this case, so that a second tank further from the east could be more easily met. I did not do that however, and I did not notice what was going on and kept shooting the tanks in front of me in the side, some of which advanced a bit again and are in the open again, till my tank takes a hit from the side which knocks out the loader. I scan for the tank that shot me to my right, but I can't see him, so I order the driver to back up to hopefully get out of the situation. I switch to the Commandos Position to get a better view and spot the new threats. As I back up, I can see that the other two tanks in my platoon are also hit and already knocked out. I turn out to get a better view of the surroundings, and the chieftains in front of me now also rotated their turrets around and start engaging my tank as well. The already knocked out second tank of my platoon takes another hit or two and blows up as I keep backing up. I hope they keep shooting the knocked out tank as I back up, but they don't. The targets I can see are still in front of me and now are firing at my tank. I try to get back to the gunner's seat and fire back, but as I do so I take another hit and my tank is out of action. And so are the other two tanks in the third platoon. So I have to change to another tank under my command. The first platoon, the one that was placed in front of the enemy, is also already knocked out, but the three tanks of the second platoon are still up, and I hope I did enough damage to the enemy that they can mop up what is left. As I take a quick look around, I can see at least one tank still alive in the main troop, but as my turret turns I can see that we have more targets to the left. Apparently yet another enemy chieftain platoon advanced to the west of the main push and is just now arriving at the second platoon's flank. I go to the gunner view and start to aim for one of the chieftains that appeared in our side. They are close but don't notice my tank right away, it seems, and I request a range from the commander. Being new to the game, I make the mistake of actually waiting for the commander's range estimate instead of just firing right away like I should have. You can't really miss with Sabre at this short range. But I hesitate too long and I take a hit from the other side before I manage to get a shot off. So we're down to two tanks now, with the enemy close on at least two sides. So my second tank of my second platoon also gets hit right away, so I'm down to the last one. It's suddenly not looking very good anymore. With all the tanks already aiming in this direction, I again get hit right away in my last tank. But at least this time I do manage to fire one last shot before my last tank is also knocked out. Our position got pretty much overrun. The briefing in the end calls it a minor defeat, and considering I got everybody killed, I guess I can't complain about that assessment. Well, that's a quick look at Steel Armor Place of War. As I have said, I do like this game a lot, and I'm surprised it is not better known. Let me know if you want to see more of it. And this is it for this video. As always, I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.